Welcome back to Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. I'm personal financial planner, columnist, and financial therapist Rick Kahler. Research tells us that 90% of all financial decisions are made emotionally, not logically. For nearly 4 decades, I've been helping people make better money decisions. So what makes my financial worldview different from most financial experts? I blend the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Good money decisions are not just about the money. So let's get started with today's episode. Welcome back to another edition. I have Deb Kaplan with me. And we're going to talk about something near and dear to Deb's heart. Something very boring. Cognitive biases.
And let's talk about how near and dear it became to your heart after.
Well, transformations do happen. I didn't even want to include them in the book.
Yeah, talk about having a conversation around how to compromise or how to understand your partner. This actually might be very interesting for the next segment that we do. But what were you going to say regarding cognitive biases?
Well, cognitive biases, this is behavioral finance, right? And this is called heuristics, is another name for them, right? And they're applied to the masses. They're applied to the bias of anchoring, meaning that when a number is mentioned, we tend to fixate on that and judge everything else from that.
Well, how about from a spoken language perspective? I'll translate all that. The shortcuts we make and the assumptions we come to based on a short or limited amount of information.
And they're usually applied to the masses. So it's never helpful if you study these to tell your partner, oh, you know you're anchoring right now. And now you're hurting.
Like using generalizations to describe
confirmation bias. And these are, I have always, I will use always, seen them applied on a macro level. And a lot of people will think, well, what financial therapy, financial psychology is all about, it's behavioral finance. No. It's the opposite of behavioral finance, which is macro at the high altitude, looking at humanity and the generalizations. And financial therapy is about the micro, looking at the person. So I really get up when somebody says, oh, you're into behavioral finance. No, I've been on panels where they've said that, introduced me in behavioral finance, and that's usually not doesn't go well after that. So that was my thinking when Deb says, oh, we've got cognitive biases.
I think we should bring it back to couples and why we included it in the book.
Well, we included it because Deb wanted to include it.
Right. Okay, so
and so I compromised and I got the stuff. And part of what I did was to bring things back from an IFS perspective.
Well, let me share what my thinking was and what I shared with you so that the viewer listener can get a sense about why it was even a consideration to have or not to have. Cognitive biases, as you just described, has to do with a very top level generalizations, beliefs that we make about something with limited information. And that it's used in behavioral finance. And so on the surface, as an author of a book about couples, you would likely say, nah, it's too dry. And I agree with you. Behavioral economics, nah, it's too dry. But when I asked you to consider the arguments and conflicts that couples get in, or the individual gets anchored into an opinion, a perspective about, no, this is a very valuable, got to buy this piece of art, or we have to buy this car, or I don't want that, or I don't want this because it's not valuable. the beliefs that come along with these conflicts really do help couples to understand themselves and why we sometimes make the assumptions and have the perspectives that we have. So maybe it's helpful to dig into what some of the more common cognitive biases are.
And what you've described actually, and what we talk about in the constructive communication chapter, is doing a U-turn, right?
Yes.
So knowing them enough to know, oh, this is what I'm doing here.
Right.
That can be helpful. So yes. So when I got into them, I just said, okay, how can we make this? How can I look deeper into the heart of the individual, which was through my lens, my heart, and see what comes up emotionally in each of these.
Right.
And I have never seen anything written from that perspective to bring the cognitive bias down to the macro level. So I think, and well, I'm excited about that. This is the first time I've ever seen anybody try to address that. Any book try to address that.
I've never seen it made so user-friendly and understandable so that people can actually dig in and have it useful in their life. You're right.
Yeah. So that's why I became super excited as each of these I got into and just spent time sensing and kind of feeling into it. What would do that? And what I would like to explore, the one I think that really impacted me a lot, is confirmation bias.
Let's dig into that one.
So why don't you explain what confirmation bias is, Deb?
Confirmation bias is that a person or individual arrives at a belief and finds the evidence that supports their belief. For example, if we invest in this stock, I guarantee you, Rick, I come to you and say, we need to invest in XYZ stock. It's a moneymaker. I know we're going to make money on it. This company is bound to succeed. And look, I found all this information that says I'm right. It supports and confirms my belief. Now, that may be true. There will be evidence, but the confirmation bias also says that I go to the extent that I disqualify other information that might lend a different outcome. And that may not necessarily confirm, but contradict, actually.
Buddy. So, yeah. What's happening within you if you're looking for everything that confirms and avoiding what may be opposing? What emotionally is happening?
And well, emotionally,
or an individual, but
yeah, for me, for an individual, for someone, because we are all, and I think that's another important piece to add here. Everyone is susceptible to a bias, regardless of what it is. And there are many, many biases, but in confirmation bias, I am becoming very wedded, anchored to this belief. And I might be very frustrated if my partner does not want to see it this way. I might have some fear that if we don't invest in XYZ stock, we're going to lose an opportunity. I may be actually counterintuitively very fearful because if I'm ignoring evidence to the contrary about my belief, I'm afraid that I may be wrong. And so I don't want to be wrong. I need to be right. And I'm afraid that I have to ignore evidence in order not to make that come to pass. And we see how couples argue.
That's the one when I landed on that, okay, why would I be only looking at information that supports a belief? What is the fear behind looking and considering opposing information? And I think you hit it. That's what I came down to. well, I'm wrong. And what does that mean to be wrong?
Underneath that, there's another emotion, shame.
Shame. Yep. Now I'm going to approach it a little bit from an Enneagram that I'm a 1 type. And you can go read about that because we're not going to get into it. But my personality would say, well, if I'm wrong, I'm defective. There is something wrong with me to be wrong because, to your point, there's huge shame in being wrong.
Yeah.
And so in IFS speak, it's a protector that says I must be right.
Exactly.
Because I'm protecting this really vulnerable part that says, that feels tons of shame to even entertain the fact that I'm wrong because it means I'm defective or I'm not enough or
that's the belief one makes up about themselves that I'm defective or there's
correct.
something wrong with me.
That would be the exile who then throws up all of the emotions around that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the protector doesn't want us to feel. So we scan for what confirms that we're right. So this vulnerable part won't get triggered.
And I want to add, exactly. And I want to add for the viewer or listener, where does all this stem from? Unresolved trauma. We're not talking about big T trauma accidents or major catastrophes, the slights of everyday developmental childhood trauma of experiences that might be rooted in financial situations, divorces, deaths, loss of a job, having to leave a home, all the things that really do become part of our existence and our belief system.
Yep. Yeah. Behind almost all of this, a vulnerability, a wounding is a trauma.
Yeah.
Little T or big T.
So what's the best way if I had to fabricate a way to make a workaround? So I don't want to feel that defectiveness or that shame or that not good enoughness. I certainly can make up a story that I'm right. And you see, it says so here.
That's right. The protector's looking at and saying, here's evidence, here's evidence, here's evidence, here's evidence. We're right. You can relax. And whatever might be contrary evidence, now I can make up all sorts of stories. Well, that it comes from failed research. That's from this loony over here.
I can discount it, dismiss it, discredit it all day long.
Totally.
Now, let's say it's the partner in a relationship that I'm discounting. And you come to me and you say, Deb, if we invest in XYZ stock or investment, I just think it's not a prudent investment right now. And I believe that the outcome you're seeing evidence for it's not supported. I just don't see that from an economics or personal finances. And I start discounting you. No, you don't understand. You don't get how this works. I've been doing more reading than you. And of course, I'm rooted in this bias. I'm rooted in my own perspective, my perception, and we're off to the races, right? If we're not able to come to terms with, well, what bothers you and what is it you're bringing to me that I don't want to see? And that's compromise, communication, dialogue that we go over later on that we'll get to. But these biases are pretty interesting.
Yeah, in what you just described, I can feel you're presenting evidence. Okay, boom, that vulnerable part's getting triggered, and I'm going to immediately become defensive, dismissive, minimizing, and now my partner that's presenting the opposing information doesn't feel heard
at all, right?
And feels minimized, discounted, I'm not being seen.
Yep. And angry now. And
Yep.
now we find our corners and we don't talk. And now we don't actually, this will be put aside. Maybe we'll revisit it. Maybe we won't until the next dust up comes and we're back again at it.
Yep. So I'm thinking, okay, how do we avoid this? How do we start healing this? Well, this may not be the place to start, but it's somebody needs to be curious.
Yeah.
And be
say more
able
about what that means?
not to react, but to say, well, tell me more about this. Help me understand this. I want to understand where you're coming from. Okay. And being more receptive to listening, at least, or here's what I hear you saying. Boom, boom, and boom. Is that right? Am I getting this? And being able to hang out until that person says, yeah, you're getting what I'm saying. They feel heard.
And oftentimes in communication, couples don't listen. They are defending. They're just waiting. And in the silence of the when I'm sitting here listening, what I'm actually doing is I'm creating more defensive beliefs and more defensive stance just to double down on why my perspective is accurate.
Right. And I want to say, just listening to this sounds simple. Get curious. This is hard to do.
So simple.
When you're triggered, right? Boom. You dissociate, whatever comes up, boom, boom. You're in your limbic brain. In IFS speak, there's no self present. You're blended with this part, and away we go.
And we talk about the visual of the boardroom with the little kids in backpacks, and all these kids are just in the boardroom, just arguing, throwing food, having a food fight, arguing with each other. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, Deb, I picked one. Well, what bias would you like to explore?
So I think another fun cognitive bias to talk about is loss aversion. That's a big one for many people.
What is loss aversion?
So loss aversion.
A loss, right?
It is at its simplest. It's an aversion to an I prefer not to lose, and so I will do everything I can to make sure that does not happen. Now there's a lot of blending.
That any loss is bad. No way are we going to lose anything.
It's not only just I don't like to lose, I have an aversion to losing. And it becomes a very rigid way of thinking because there are at times a necessary loss, but in the bigger picture, such as when the stock market may pull back a bit and or there's a blip of news in the news cycle or an event that's happening and stocks react to it and a stock price may go down. And people go, oh, no, I can't lose. And I sell. They sell at the bottom, they buy at the top, right? And so that loss aversion is really very counterproductive. It's self-defeating.
So let me spin that, it's not spin, but translate that for me. It's one thing to say I don't like losses because I don't like to see my portfolio go down. However, I'm not going to sell out. Aversion, like I can't take this. I have so much anxiety. This is going to continue. I'm going to lose everything versus, oh, I don't like this loss. But you know what? It's an opportunity to rebalance. It's an opportunity to buy more of what's going down because in the big picture, I believe that eventually it will recover.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not as much emotion being triggered, or I've been successful in the part that's going, oh my God, it's going down. No. To be with that part and acknowledge it. Yeah. And I understand the good intention is, of course, we don't want to lose everything. And here's some more information.
Now, here's the other piece. Let's put it in the context to spending and saving. One partner has more of a comfort level to spend. But the person with loss aversion does not even want to see a bank account or a checking savings account figure go down. They cannot even tolerate seeing their deposit level or their balance show a lower balance. So at all costs, we have to maintain that balance, which means the partner who spends, who may not be doing so in any problematic way, just spending, it becomes, what are you buying? Why are we spending it on that? We need to buy less. Maybe we shouldn't have bought 5 towels. We could only, we don't. So what that we have, 3 children and 5 guests coming and in-laws coming to visit, and we only have 2 towels. That's fine. That's fine. It's enough for everybody. And I'm making a very extreme case, but the point is that it gets to be very rigid again. The person who doesn't want to spend and is loss aversion, I don't want to see the bank account balance go down.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm applying it to, I've never applied it right there, and it makes sense. I've applied it to a person who has great loss aversion, usually in money script categories, a money vigilant. Mm-hmm. And if there's the money script that if your balance is going down, especially from spending, you're going backwards.
Right.
That you're spending your principal. This is not good.
We're losing financial ground here.
Exactly. So I guess from a spending standpoint, that makes a lot of sense, and it really gives a lot of problems to people when they retire.
I was just about to say it must also come up in retirement a lot as a financial.
Big time, because the common denominator of people that have wealth, typically, not everyone, but let's just say 80%, is not what they earn, not their profession, not what they invest in. It's frugality.
So what do you mean when you say wealth? People who have, how do you define what wealth is?
Well, we could go off in lots of directions on wealth.
Expendable income, you mean?
Yeah, let's talk about building net worth. Talk about it in dollar terms. They tend to be frugal. They can adapt to just about anything and spend less. And they've spent less so that they can save more. And it's worked for them. And they have the money script. Do not spend your nest egg, whether it's in cash, whether it's invested in the market, because that's losing ground. Now you come to the time in life where you have no outside income anymore. You've got to rely on that portfolio to spend.
Right.
And so many people have a hard time with that, or they'll reduce their lifestyle to their pensions and Social Security because we can't draw on that. That's for emergencies.
And to be fair, there are, couples who are getting towards the end of their earning years do have to be vigilant, and they have to be mindful and conscious about what they spend and how far their money will stretch. So to the listener or viewer, we're not in any way saying that this is a negative to be mindful or conscious. What we're saying is when there's an overabundance of worry and there's an over rigidity around spending because of that loss aversion.
Exactly. And I think of Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, who purportedly had lots of wealth, but he only burned one chunk of coal at a time. He ate the poorest of the poor when it comes to food. He was way over, driven by his money scripts, driven by his little t or big T traumas. All right. Yeah. How do I recover from that? What do I do if I have this fear?
I think it's a good question, actually, because I'm glad before we close that we do talk about that. that the individual who has a overabundance of worry, if it's about loss aversion, looking at where in their past this comes from, are there experiences that connect to their now belief that the cognitive bias that I loss aversion? Is there a trauma or traumas that are attached to it? Where actually is the evidence that says to lose or give up a little in a balance or a bank account or an investment long-term is a negative? So there's got to be some logic applied to this, because it's an illogical thought process. So logic is helpful here. We're also looking at the emotions of what drives this, and what going forward are they willing to do to change, to modify their behavior and their beliefs just enough that it doesn't send them into a tizzy because they're abandoning that protector part that's looking to do its job of protecting the pain and the exile, but enough to allow it to see that the world won't fall apart if they take little steps towards behavior modification.
Yes, absolutely. In working with those parts to understand, in IFS, we work with the vulnerable part and go back to when did this belief first pop up? What happened? When did you first start feeling this way? Oftentimes it'll go back to some childhood event where there was a loss of something. It could be money. Mm-hmm. It could be a thing. That part never grows up. That part, the protectors stop in and say, this is never going to happen again. You're never going to feel this way again, whether it's fear, violation, hurt. Yep. And it never has its day to be witnessed and seen. So, and I think big tenet in counseling, you can tell me this is right or not, is telling your story maybe for the first time ever that has been forgotten or there's huge shame around, and being received with non-judgment. Wow. Empathy, mm-hmm. Connection,
compassion.
Passion, yeah.
And having compassion for yourself, having your story and your own experience witnessed and validated, or, of course, validated because this is what happened, but also allowing other perspectives in, because there may be a perspective that we carry that's false. Remember, cognitive biases come out of an assumption we make on a very core level about something that we have very little information about. So when we're in trauma, where you have a very narrow perspective, we don't allow in other pieces of information, other bits of information that could help balance the thought and the belief. Yet when we allow other people's words in, our partner, conversation, now we can perhaps shift a bit, because we may not have taken into consideration the things that will help us reorient or change how we want to be and what we want to change about our own belief and behavior.
Excellent stuff, Deb. We're going to have to leave it there.
Another wonderful conversation.
Thanks so much. And we will see everyone next time. Thanks for joining me, Rick Kahler, for another episode of Financial Therapy. It's not just about the money. This is where I combine the nuts and bolts of financial advice with the emotions that drive making them. Remember, every financial behavior, whether it appears illogical to you or others, makes perfect sense when we understand the underlying beliefs, feelings, and thoughts. Sign up for my weekly blog at financialawakenings.com. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode.